Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychic Wives. I am Kathy Rumsey,
I'm Ginger Hendry.
And I am Jerry Carabin.
and we have two guests with us today that I'm really excited about. Maria Forland, who has been with us before, a spirit artist, and Jeff Tarrant. Am I saying that correctly?
You
Tarrant?
are. That's exactly right.
Awesome. And you're a psychologist and a neuroscientist, correct?
That's right. That's it.
So this is super exciting because we don't usually get very technical, like scientific people
Yeah, we get more
interested
woo-woo.
in this. But you guys are joining us today because we're going to talk a little bit about the science aspect of mediumship and getting to understand it better. And that's what you've been looking into, Jeff, is the how the brain works, like changes in the brain and I'm assuming like what gets fired in the brain when you're doing mediumship stuff. So why don't you, if you want to, just give me a little bit about you and how you and Maria met?
Sure. Yeah. So how I got into this? Well, it's sort of a longer story, but the short story is I was not looking for this. It sort of found me, as these things tend to do. And so it's probably about 11 years ago, and was presented an opportunity to look at somebody's brainwave activity who channels South American tribal languages.
Mm.
And so I was invited to do that. And I said, sure, why not? That sounds like fun. And, and then I blame her for me getting into this stuff, because then the next thing I know, I'm being introduced to other mediums and other psychics. And, everybody, it's been interesting because everybody that I've met has been very interested and curious about getting their brains mapped. And
Yes.
so it has not been hard to find participants. And so just over the last 10 or 11 years, I've just been accumulating more and more data and trying to make some sense out of it.
Well, that's fantastic because it's a little bit rare for the scientific community to not just automatically poo-poo this woo-woo stuff. Um, and Ginger and Jerry and I say all the time, like, we don't know how we get what we get. It just, to us, it just comes to us. But obviously, there's stuff happening in our brain that is allowing it. So this is super cool. Jerry's raising.
I just want to interject something because it is super cool and it's a little bit of a tangent, but this is when I really started thinking about this and why I was intrigued to have you on, Jeff, because I wear an aura ring. Of course, I don't have it on right now, but Kathy's wearing it right now.
Yeah.
And it does your sleep and your stress and stuff like this. And I found this was last year. I don't know if you know, but the aura ring will do, like, if it'll say, you'll get a little thing on your app saying, hey, you had an confirmed workout. Okay, so it's your heart rate. I was doing readings with that aura ring on, and I'd finish and I'd happen to later update the app on my phone, and it would say you have an unconfirmed workout. And I'm like, what? And it would be between the hours of 1 and 2 when I was in a reading. And
so that happened to me the other day when I was down. I was grooming, but I was also sharing Reiki with my horse, and I got the same thing. And I actually dismissed it and thought, well, maybe my heart rate was up because I had just walked him in the barn. But now that you say that,
no, because I'm not sitting there in a reading going like on the treadmill. I'm calm, but you can see the actual spikes in this graph. So anyway, so that's why when we heard you, I was like, oh my God, let's talk to him. So sorry about that little tangent, but I thought it was cool, and it's kind of in line with what we're talking about here.
And it sounds like maybe I need to expand some of the different biometrics that I'm evaluating, because I've been, I've been kind of fixated on the brain, but there's a lot of other ways to measure your physiology, and clearly something's going on. So thanks. Now I've got another thing to add to my list.
Yeah, right. Now you got to get a cardiologist involved too. So what is happening in the brain when we access these forms of knowing, or, psychic abilities or spirit communication?
Yeah. And of course, it's not a simple answer, because so one of the things that I've seen, at least with the data I've collected, is that there are some similarities. There's some patterns that show up, and at the same time, there's differences. not everybody is exactly the same. It seems like there's different ways that people shift their brainwave patterns in order to access this information. But the patterns that are pretty consistent, and the ones that probably make the most sense to talk about here, one of them relates to an area of the brain called the God spot. And that's, of course, not the official name. The official name is the right parietal lobe. Or if you want to get even more technical, the superior parietal lobule, if you want to get really specific. But it's back here, right? It's this back right quadrant of the brain. And one of the things that I see over and over and over again is that part of the brain seems to go offline especially during spirit communication or mediumship. Oh. And this is a part of the brain that I wasn't even familiar with it till I kept seeing this pattern and then started to figure out, like, well, what is this? And, the media had dubbed this part of the brain the God spot years ago because of some other research that had found that people that have injuries to that part of the brain become more spiritual. They have more spiritual experiences, including things like communicating with their deceased loved ones and having visions and things like this. As well as becoming more empathic. And so clearly there's something about this part of the brain that's important. Well, actually, it's turning that part of the brain off is what's important. Getting it to not inhibit the flow of information that's coming through. Mm. And so different mediums have different ways to do that, but it shows up frequently.
Interesting. So do you think that everyone has the ability to be psychic or communicate with spirit?
Yes. And I say that coming from two different kind of places. One is just experimenting with people, including myself, that I wouldn't say, yes, I'm a psychic. I don't,
right.
I don't practice this professionally. I don't, but of course you can't be in this field and not experiment on yourself a little bit and say, well, gosh, I wonder if I can do this. But then also looking at other people who are curious and seeing if they can develop these things. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I've interviewed dozens of mediums, and all of them say, everybody can do this. Mm-hmm. Everybody has this ability. And so just from those sort of pieces of information, my conclusion is that it's like, yeah, I think we're all born with this ability, and then the brain gets in the way.
Yes.
As the brain develops and as language develops and as we get enculturated, that we essentially shut down our ability to access that information. And so then, some people are just lucky, right? Like Maria, right? It's like, well, and you guys, right? Like it's like your brain just knows how to do that. But then there's other people like me where it's like, okay, now I got to figure out how to shut that thing off. And so I think that's the trick.
It's funny because I don't know what Maria's experience has been in getting into this, but I've talked with a lot of people, not around mediumship, but around psychic abilities, who would say that it seems like a pretty good correlation between people who have experienced trauma, like capital T trauma, and their psychic ability. Like somehow whatever trauma they endured helped them open up, or maybe just be more receptive to their psychic abilities as a form of like self-protection.
As a form of self-protection.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you go through a trauma and it's like you look back and go, oh, I knew in my gut, whatever.
Oh, mm-hmm.
It's start listening to that more, like realizing, oh, that's there. I should have realized it before X happened.
Yeah.
I wonder though too, when we're talking about this, when you had mentioned, Jeff, that you could turn off that part. We need to turn off that part of the brain. That's what mediums do and whatnot. But how do we know? How do people know how to do that? Like when you're saying that, I don't know what I do at all. I make a connection and it just works. So I'm wondering, are people born with, not everybody's born with the ability, because I do believe that, but is it stronger? Is that part of the brain that accesses it stronger for some or the other, or?
Yeah, I think of it as a flexibility. And my current kind of feeling about it is that mediums, for whatever reason, have a bit of a more flexible brain so that they don't get stuck in certain rigid patterns. So, maybe the rest of us, it's kind of like that right parietal lobe is always on, it's always doing its job. And so it's really hard to connect. Whereas other people, it's kind of off and on. Sometimes it's on, sometimes it's off. There's more fluidity in how it behaves. And, and that's kind of true with everybody, with all of our parts of our brain, right? Like certain people are going to have other parts of the brain that are more flexible than others. And so at least my current thinking is that it's just one of those sort of natural variations, right? That just some people, for whatever reason, and then there may be things like big T traumas that can kind of loosen that up, right? And I think it's true even kind of going between the left and right hemisphere, which is a little bit of a different part of the conversation. But I think mediums are particularly good at shifting back and forth really quickly so that they can go to the right side and access information and then go to the left side and interpret it and verbalize it and make sense out of it. Whereas a lot of other people kind of get stuck in one hemisphere or the other. And so you either can't communicate what's going on, you lose it because you can't verbalize it, or you're stuck in analytic mode and you never can tap in. Yeah. And so for me, the whole issue becomes flexibility, brain flexibility.
And maybe that's why, sorry, Ginger, maybe that's why, or because we maybe have our brains a little more flexible, that when we go, because we each do have a little tiny little ritual before every reading, I say a prayer, I sage, I ground myself, I do certain things for 5 minutes before.
Which is all really quieting your brain, right?
Which is quieting your brain, and maybe that's because our brain is flexible.
And when we started, I know Ginger and I, like when I started, it was a half-hour meditation. Now it's a minute or two of just, the more you do it, the better you get at it. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting what you were saying there, because I was thinking, like, let's say you're in the middle of a reading, and then let's say something comes up and you don't quite understand it, which you don't really need to understand it. You just need to deliver it. But what happens sometimes is you think, okay, that doesn't really make sense. And you try to go up and I'll just say, be analytical, and it pulls all the energy. Yeah, it's like, okay, so that is learned, right? That ability to just let that go. Okay, that's really interesting.
Yeah. And that's a very right-brained process, right, of what you're describing. And so it's interesting because even though you're still using language, which is a left-brain process, and this is what most of the mediums I've talked to say, right, that it's like they're just letting the information come through without filtering it. So they're not trying to interpret it or understand it. They're just saying it. So you're still using language, but you're not using it in the typical way of creating a story, which is what language usually does, right? It sort of makes a story out of our experiences. And I think that's where we get in trouble, is when we get over there and start trying to make sense out of it,
right,
and trying to interpret it, then we kind of take away from the raw truth of what is coming through.
And that's really true, because I remember I just did a reading the other day where I was saying, whatever I was saying, and I was saying, do you understand this? Because I don't, but I don't need to. Like, I had no idea what the heck I was talking about. And she was like, nope, I totally understand. I'm like, okay, because I didn't need to understand. And sometimes I think if I'm loving what you're saying, because sometimes I think if I try to understand it, it pulls me out.
Like, well, it happened to me last week, which is why I was thinking it, because I had a lot of feeling that came through, and I was delivering that feeling around a situation. And what I was feeling from the person on the other side didn't match what I was seeing. And so I didn't even realize that I was doing like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. And it was like, stop and start, because I didn't even hear that mind chatter from myself. And it wasn't until after I did the reading, and I thought, I didn't have to, because the person who was sitting got it.
Right.
So I thought,
it's funny how we get in our own way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to ask one question, and I don't want to talk in depth about it because it could be like a whole other podcast, but I have a son who's autistic, and Ginger has a grandson who's on the spectrum, and they are both very intuitive, even though they seem like they're very rigid in their thinking. And I was wondering if you've ever done any looking around autistic brains and this. And again, I don't want to get too much into it because it's not what we're here talking about, but
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
This is so awesome, Jeff. You got a story with the young boy.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually last year I had the opportunity to work with 3 different autistic individuals. The youngest was 13, and then I think the oldest was maybe 24 or something like that. And they're all 3 are nonverbal. But they all 3 communicate by with using a letterboard. And so pointing and spelling. So they're very bright. And once they could learn to communicate, you could really see how much they actually know and how much they're absorbing from the environment. And people assume like, oh, they don't know what's going on. It's like, oh no, they know exactly what's going on. And so anyway, all 3 of these individuals that I was able to work with were, basically 100% accurate in their telepathy with their primary caregiver. We ran them through all kinds of tests. We could pull out a 4-digit random number and show it to the mom, and the kid, adolescent, teenager, adult, they would just point to the 4 letters, or 4 numbers.
Oh my gosh.
Like, and we could just do this over and over. Like one time we did it like 40 times in a row, and it was like rapid fire. It was so fast. We barely showed the number to the mom before, the kid was pointing to the number board. Boop, 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 boop. It was like instantaneous. They just had the information.
That's amazing.
It is.
It was intense. For me, that was one of the things that just sort of was like, okay, the skeptical part of my brain, like, well, what do you do with that? Right. There's only so much skepticism you can have when you see stuff like that,
So the subject was telepathically connected to the caregiver.
Yeah. And some of them, some of them, it was with the primary caregiver, it was definitely the strongest.
Mm-hmm.
With one of them, that was really the only person she was totally accurate with. Sometimes she could do it with dad, sometimes not. It wasn't 100%. Other people, not really. But one of the other young adults, he could do it with anybody. It didn't really matter.
It's amazing.
And yeah, we were down there filming, and one of the film crew guys who was just in the background all day watching this, right? He wasn't participating. He didn't have any interaction, but he was like just being amazed the whole time. And at the end of the day, when they were packing up, he wrote a word on a piece of paper and held it to his chest and went up to this young adult and said, what's on this piece of paper? And, no problem. He wrote friend, and, he spelled it out perfectly. And so, it was like, wow.
Unbelievable.
Okay.
That's so cool.
Yeah, that is really cool. That is really cool. So we were, and thank you so much for talking about that. Cause personally, I'm very interested just because of my relationship with my son, and I can see how empathic he is. And there's a lot of communication that goes on between us that's not spoken.
Yeah.
So we were talking, you were talking about basically that God spot and how, people who've had accidents or somehow injured or impacted that part of their brain can open up more. So other than like bashing your head against a wall,
which I wouldn't recommend.
I would not either. Like what other kinds of things have you seen that have helped open that up? I'm assuming creativity is a big one, and that's where Maria comes into this conversation. Thank you for sitting so quietly, Maria.
I'm always fascinated with the merge of the science and the spirit, because honestly, until we reconnected after many years, it was I don't know, it was a story unfolding for me too, because he's helped me to respond to better techniques, so I can pass along to people that are frightened or unable, they think, to connect. And then through a number of different types of modalities, we can support the brain before we get in the way. So it's helped me to even connect more deeply with some of these modalities.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's talk a little bit about creativity and psychic abilities and mediumship abilities. What have been your findings?
Me or Maria?
Oh, you, Jeff. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So yeah, it's interesting because this is a little bit of a new exploration for me. And so Maria's really kind of helping me explore this more. And part of it's just my background. It's not that I'm not creative, but I spend my creative juices in sort of, not in sort of producing art or music or something, right? Like in other ways, right? Through my research and whatnot. But it makes perfect sense because one of the things that we keep running into, and we've already mentioned it, is this sort of need to be able to access information on the right side of the brain. And so the right side of the brain is nonverbal, right? And so there's certain kinds of meditation states that can help us get there. Actually, mindfulness, true mindfulness, is where you're just tuning into the sensory experience of what's happening in the moment without an interpretation. It's exactly what we just said earlier, right? It's very right-brained. There's some technology interventions that we've been using, and we can talk about that later if you want, that seem to help activate or deactivate that part of the brain. But then, of course, the right side of the brain, we think of frequently as being connected to creativity. And so to me, like once Maria and I started talking, I was like, well, this makes perfect sense, right? That it's like accessing your creativity it's helping you stay connected to that right hemisphere. And so it makes perfect sense. And of course, Maria's got a perfect way of doing it because she's doing it through art. So I think that's brilliant. It makes perfect sense. And so I'm excited to learn more and incorporate more of that, right? Like how can we use more creative expression as a way to either help access this or to bring through the information, kind of like Maria does.
Yeah, Maria, I'm going to, can you just tell some people briefly about what you do? Because I know you've been on here before, but people that are joining us now may not have seen yours because it was quite a while ago. So just explain briefly what you do, because we keep referring to you and somebody may be saying, what the heck does she do?
Well, I'm a spirit artist, medium psychic. And that spirit art means many different things to many different people. And when we're talking about mediumship, it's the ability to draw either the face, the imagery of some sort of recognition, or even an icon or a picture of some sort that would relate to the spirit person. And we give evidence verbally. I know you've all been fabulous scribblers. We call it the spiritual doodling or precious doodling. And as we unfold in a reading, oftentimes drawing a face is a very positive experience, but also the aura of a person. Say you just put a shock of color across the paper and they go, oh, that was my father's favorite color. And that starts you into clicking your brain out of the way, I guess. That's a technical term.
Clicking your brain out of the way.
That works.
Yeah.
To be able to just keep going, then there's confidence in that. So I don't think that creativity and spirit art is just for the medium. I am strongly believing now that we all live this creative life, and we recognize more deeply how these things impact us, and helping to bring people that feel they have no artistic experience into more self-awareness, more joyful daily living, So it's not just spirit art that I'm passionate about. It's the way spirit works with us creatively in our daily life.
And so can we talk about some different examples of creative stuff. Talk about a technical term. And I think we lost Maria briefly. Look, she looks frozen, or
Yeah.
she fell asleep.
Yeah, and just so everybody that's listening to this knows, there is currently a blizzard kind of going on up where Kathy and Maria and Ginger are. So Maria kind of had a feeling that she might lose power. So we'll see if she comes back. But one thing I wanted to mention about Maria, that in the video that you guys did, Jeff and Maria, watching Maria do it both-handed,
Amazing.
insane.
Yeah.
It is so cool. And Jeff, you talked about that a little bit in that thing that you did, the interview and everything that you did. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you know, and actually that was the first time I'd seen her do that, was when she
Me
sent me this
too, in
video
the
clip.
video. I had no idea.
I had no idea either. I just assumed, you know, like if I was going to draw a picture, I would use my dominant hand. And so, but yeah, when you're watching Maria do it, she's using both hands simultaneously, drawing this picture. And, you know, it's really genius, again, in some ways, because your non-dominant hand is going to be more tapped into that creative flow, because it's going to be, you know, it's going to take you out of predicting and the way that you normally see the world, right? Because, you know, we have these habitual patterns that we get used to processing information. And so, you know, and some of that is going to be, well, you know, I write, I draw with one hand. And so using both at the same time, and it also sort of makes you, I would think, and I'd love to hear what Maria says, but, you know, it has to just be more of a flowing process, right? You can't think too much about it. You just have to sort of move.
And I think she actually says that she's like kind of in like a Zen thing. I think she says something like that.
Like a light trance, I think, you know, and
yes.
And so it reminds me a little bit of what you all were saying earlier, right? That with other types of mediumship, you kind of have to get out of the way and just let the information come through verbally, but she's doing it through the drawing. So the information is just coming through, and she's just allowing it to happen, I think.
And it's stunning because it's coming through. You would think that if you're drawing this way and then you're drawing this way, they're not going to, you know, one's going to be up here, one's going to be back. And no, she's drawing a face. I was like,
It's
I was
amazing to
shocked.
watch.
It's amazing.
So Maria and I met at a spirit art workshop where she was a participant. She wasn't teaching the workshop, and she and I got paired together, which was a little daunting. She was a wonderful artist. I didn't know about her mediumship abilities because this workshop that was offered said you don't need any psychic abilities, just, you know. So I went just to check. I went to get more into the art piece of it, and I didn't know. We got paired up, and I saw her artistic abilities and was literally like, so I can draw stick figures. But it's so interesting, you know, even like holding the pencil like this, which I know for people who are only listening, you can't see, but the man who was teaching the workshop said, you know, don't hold it like you normally do, because that puts you very much into your left brain of, oh, I'm going to be writing a letter, you know, change it, or change which hand you're using. And it just opens up having to rely, I'm assuming, on that right side of your brain more for the flow.
And to add to that, I took a drawing class when I was back in college. I used to draw a bit, and our instructor had us, we were looking at a picture, like a print of something, and we had to turn it upside down and draw it upside down, because now you're just seeing shapes. You're just seeing, your brain is not interpreting it, that, oh, there's a line here and a thing here and a thing here. So you definitely believe that she has the ability, because of both her hands are going, that's opening everything up here.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would suspect, right? And it's kind of that flexibility issue that we keep kind of bumping into, that again, you know, kind of the rigid way of doing it, right, is like you would use your dominant hand, you would draw a picture. But it's like if you're changing it up, you're doing it upside down, or you're holding the pencil a different way, or you're using your non-dominant hand. All of those things, I think, are creating flexibility. You're asking your brain to engage in a way that it normally doesn't. And, I think that does open up that right side, that sort of creative aspect. It makes it more experiential as opposed to analytic.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
A friend of mine sent me a little video clip of somebody, and I'm not going to quote who it was because I don't remember or whatever, but it was something about changing, is it binaural pathways? Is that what they would call it?
Binaural.
Whatever.
Binaural, yeah.
Like, yeah, brushing your teeth with the opposite hand. Like, would that be the same thing, like getting that, starting out the day, getting that other brain going as well?
Yeah. And I think, again, like on this flexibility thing, I think anytime we can disrupt our normal habitual patterns, that's a good thing. Do you always sit in the same spot somewhere? Well, what if you sat somewhere different? Even simple things like that, right? Like break up the routine, like do things differently. Because it shifts you out of that sort of just robotic, automatic processing.
What you know.
Which is how most of, the brain likes that. The brain likes habit, which is why we all form lots of habits. It makes life easy, but it also makes it sort of boring, right? And repetitive. And
they suggest that too, even to stave off, memory loss as an older person and everything. Yeah.
I was just thinking, Jerry, when you're doing a reading, I don't know if you would call this process creative, but you write when you're reading, right? Yes. I don't know that I could do that, so maybe I should try to do that.
Because the thing is, and I think that we've talked about that before, it's like I am a writer by trade, so I will see words in a reading. So I'm always writing words. I'm not usually doodling pictures, but yes, I'm writing words down.
Have you ever tried writing with your non-dominant hand while you're doing reading?
All the time.
It's amazing.
Yes, all the time.
That's amazing.
It's really powerful.
And I love to do automatic writing where I just sit down and actually like you write with your eyes closed and just stream of consciousness stuff. And that is creative. That is, or it is at least getting out of that left brain. So I wanna just do a little housekeeping. I did just chat briefly with Maria. Her power is out. She's out on Cape Cod. She said the wind is like 50 miles an hour and everything's out. So she won't be finishing, but she wants us to finish, and this is fantastic. You talked a little about mindfulness, and then you talked about technology intervention.
Yes, I was just about to. I'm circling that.
I want to ask you about that because I use an app for meditating called Insight Timer.
Insight Timer,
yeah, and they have a lot of like the binaural beats.
Yeah.
It's not speaking, guided meditation that's speaking. It's just sound. Is that a little bit of what you were referring to?
Kind of, yeah. So there's a variety of sort of, we could call them neuromodulation or neurostimulation technologies, right? And binaural beats would fit into that category because, you're using sound in a specific way to influence the brainwave activity, is what you're doing. But there are other technologies out there that are a little bit more powerful than binaural beats. And so one of them that I use a lot is, I do have some sitting here. I've got them everywhere, but it's called audio-visual entrainment. And so you're using light stimulation. So you got these sci-fi looking glasses, right? And on the inside, you can't see because there's this white shield, but there's 4 lights built into the eye set on each side. And so you put these on, you close your eyes are closed, and you pick up a certain program, and there's a bunch of them, and then the lights flicker on and off at a certain frequency, and it drives the brain to that same frequency. So it's kind of like the binaural beats, but it's way more powerful. if you compare binaural beats to visual entrainment, there's not much of a comparison, right? It's much stronger. And so you can use that to kind of bring the brain to more of like a theta brainwave state, which is often involved in different kinds of psychic and mediumship type things, or gamma, which is also comes up a lot. It's a very fast brainwave. Mm-hmm. And actually what we've been playing with is, and seems to work really well, is splitting the visual field. So not to get too technical, but the left side of both eyes is processed in the right brain, and the right visual field of both eyes is processed on the left brain. Oh, wow. So because there's 4 lights in here, you can split the fields. So you can send one frequency to the left hemisphere and a different frequency to the right hemisphere. So we can quiet down the left hemisphere, send some really slow brain waves over there, and then we can speed up and activate the right hemisphere at the same time. So there's ways to use this tech to try to help the brain kind of shift into exactly what we're talking about, right? Like, can we get more into that right brain way of engaging, or slow the brain up, or speed it up or slow it down, or whatever it is we're trying to do.
And so what this audiovisual entrainment, what is it used for in addition to this? Like, is this a type of therapy?
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, like, my husband could, boy, if I could turn off his left brain a little.
Yeah. Don't tell him what you're doing. Just say, no, honey,
put these down and lay down.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm a psychologist. And so actually I've been using these for about 25 years in different variations, because they can be used for all kinds of different mental health, and not just mental health, but also physical. Of course, it's all connected, right? Mental health and physical stuff, they're not separate things, right? They're connected. But just to give a simple example, typically when people are depressed, the brain is actually running slower than what we would like, right? It's kind of, there's too much slow brain waves. Well, so if you run these programs at a little bit of a faster frequency, so kind of a beta type frequency, it perks the brain up. And so people tend to feel better, right? So you can do a similar thing with, they call it brain brightening, right? So like age-related decline or something like that, where you can kind of perk the brain up and it functions more efficiently. Or if you're super anxious and your brain's running 1,000,000 miles a minute, so it's running too fast, well, you put on like a theta or an alpha protocol, or drop the frequency literally, and people feel better. Or you can use it for sleep, or you can use it for ADHD, or
Or could you, I have a friend who suffers from, it was SAD, seasonal affective disorder, and she has the light thing on her desk.
Yeah.
Is that kind of along the same lines?
It's similar, and this does similar. Actually, it does help with SAD, but the light is a little bit different. The light that you get that sits on your desk is going to be more intense and a different kind of light. But they have done studies with the audiovisual entrainment, and it does seem to help with that as well. And so, there's other mechanisms in here that may be important, right? Because it increases brain blood flow. It increases the flow of cerebral spinal fluid. It increases certain kinds of neurotransmitters. So feel good, dopamine and serotonin and endorphins and things like that. So there's actually a whole bunch of mechanisms that are going on behind the scenes, but besides kind of pulling the brain into a certain frequency. So you can actually use it for a lot of things, which is another reason I like it. It's like,
And so you call it audio-visual entrainment. So there's an audio component to it at the same time?
There is, right.
And they're synced up, like whatever the setting that you put on?
Yes. Yeah. Cool. That's how it's usually used. But a lot of times I'll use it, especially when I'm doing more psi exploration kinds of things with this tech, is have people use a different kind of sound, not the sound that comes with this, but like using white noise, or using a variation of white noise, or even listening to like, space music or something, right? Something that's going to facilitate the state. And part of the reason that that works so well is because, the glasses by themselves are very effective. The sound adds a little bit, but, sometimes we can use that sound component more effectively by doing something different. What I wouldn't want to do is have two different things going on. Some people have asked me that. They're like, well, what if I listen to binaural beats and then put the glasses on something? It's like, well, now you're giving the brain two different things to do.
Right.
You're saying, well, go to theta and go to beta. And it's kind of like, look, all right, So it may be okay, but you're kind of working at cross currents a little bit.
Sounds exhausting.
That is so cool. So, so you and Maria are doing a workshop together in April, in a couple months from now, on Cape Cod.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm actually pretty intrigued at this point. So,
yeah. So we've got 3 full days, which is great, and it's going to be an interesting combination of things. I mean, I'm gonna present a little bit of the researchy brain science kind of stuff, so that people can kind of get a sense and an understanding of some of the things we're talking about, right? Like the God spot and the role of the occipital lobes in the back of the head, the visual processing, things we haven't even talked about yet. But really the goal of presenting that information is so that we can kind of like this conversation. It's like, well, okay, great. If we need to get in the right hemisphere, and you've demonstrated that through the research and science, how do we do that? And so then, of course, Maria's got all kinds of creative exercises and experiences up her sleeve. And, a lot of my work is with meditation and using technology to try to shift the brain out of its state. So breath work or stroboscopic lights, which is a little bit different than the audiovisual, qigong, there's all kinds of ways to tune into your energy, shift the brain state. So it's going to be a nice mix, I think, of some science, some experiences to try to get the brain into the desired state, and then trying things, right? Like doing readings and other, some spirit art and some other kinds of active psychic mediumship type activities, so people can get a sense of like, is this helping to tap in, or is it making the process easier? So it's going to be, 3 days of a combo of all of that, of fun. Yeah.
It sounds super interesting. And I do love the science aspect of it, because there's just so much validation that I'm hearing from you, and that's, again, like I said, we're always like, I don't know how it works. And there are times, especially in the beginning, when you're just starting out in your work, where you just say, I feel like I'm making this up. Because you don't know, we don't know how it works, and we don't understand it. So it's really cool that and I know that the man that I did my mediumship mentoring program with was, had scientists studying his brain as well. He's a spirit artist too. So
when you're studying, sorry, Kath, you're studying, are you like hooked up electrodes and stuff like this? And
typically
I saw that on TV once.
Yeah. There have been a couple
medium,
Yeah. There was a while back, I think Dr. Amen hooked up Teresa Caputo on and
Tyler Henry's gotten hooked up.
Tyler Henry got hooked up recently. So it's a very similar process to what those things look like. It's called an electro cap. It kind of looks like a swimming cap. And there's, at least the system I use has 19 electrodes. And so you can measure 19 areas of the brain simultaneously, as well as how those different areas communicate with each other, which is actually really interesting. And that's an area that most people haven't really talked much about. And I'm still exploring a little bit of how to analyze my data better with that, because you do see some dramatic changes, not just in how much theta or gamma or whatever is happening, but also the connectivity, how different areas are talking to each other, which may be even more important than, you know, cranking out a lot of theta. Maybe more like, well, how is this part of the brain talking to this part of the brain?
Do you see a difference when you are doing that study between somebody who's doing like an energy healing versus somebody who's doing a mediumship reading? Is it the same? Are you getting the same kind of data?
Not usually. So the energy healing, which is actually one of my things I'm super interested in right now, just because that's, you know, each of us has our own sort of skills, right? And mediumship's not my strong suit, right? You know, but energy healing, that's more up my alley. And so, you know, so just personally, I have a lot of interest in that. And one of the patterns that you see pretty regularly is kind of the occipital lobe, the back of the head lighting up with gamma, fast brainwave activity. Now that's a common pattern that we see with psychics. We see it a lot. And I interpret that as exactly what it sounds like. You're getting information, you're seeing information. And I think it's interesting that tends to be gamma, which is the fastest frequency. And so, you know, when people talk about higher vibration or things like that, it's like, well, maybe there's some accuracy to that, right? Like, because that's literally what we're seeing is the fastest vibration lighting up in the visual processing areas of the brain. The other area you see a lot with healing is the left frontal, which sounds contradictory in some ways because, you know, that's like verbal language processing. And most of the healers that I've worked with and the stuff I've studied, well, you're not thinking about stuff, you know, you're sort of holding space, if anything else, right? And my interpretation of that is similar to what you see with when you look at brain images of like Tibetan monks, right? So Tibetan monks who are doing like a compassion meditation, one of the parts of the brain that lights up is the left prefrontal lobe. And the reason for that is because that area of the brain is associated, especially in comparison to the right, with sort of positive emotional states, like moving towards something, having an approach motivation, moving towards something, and with this sort of positive, open-hearted kind of perspective. So I think that's actually what's going on with the healers, right? It's like, you know, you've got this, you're holding space, but you're holding space in a way that's compassionate and loving and caring. And you're obviously in an approach motivation because you're literally with the person in their energy field. And so anyway, I think that's probably what's going on there and why we see those results.
Very cool. Very, very cool. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that we haven't touched. I mean, I could talk to you all day, personally.
I know, right?
But is there anything else that you're like, I really want to talk about this thing, like go get this message across?
I mean, I don't know if there's a specific thing except that I think just wanting to be encouraging on two ways, being encouraging of people to, when it's appropriate, and obviously not all circumstances, but to be willing to speak out about these things and be vocal. And again, I know that that's not appropriate for everybody in every circumstance, but it's interesting starting to kind of step out a little bit more with this work as a scientist. And both, you know, the amount of pushback you get from certain people in the scientific community, but then at the same time, all the people messaging me and being appreciative for speaking out. And so to me, what that says is more people need to speak out because a lot of people are having these experiences and having a lot of weird things going on. But there's this, you know, whatever, there's this sort of attitude in our culture that it's like, oh, you're crazy, you're making stuff up, you're woo, you're out there. Right. But the reality is the majority of people out there have these experiences.
Yeah. And you've got scientific data backing it up.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, hello.
Well, and I have seen a shift though in the last 5 or 7 years of, it's actually becoming more commonplace for you to hear it on like the morning news program, them talking about stuff that's more spiritual, you know, not religious spiritual, but spiritual and that sort of thing, and talking about mindfulness. You know, even just the mindfulness movement has been huge. So
Yeah.
and helpful for this you know, woo-woo community. So to speak.
No, I totally agree with you. You know, there has been a shift. And so, you know, just wanting to encourage that, right? That it's like, you know, like let's keep shifting, and let's, you know, and you know, and so kind of related to that, I think the other thing is just that this idea that we all do have this ability. And so, but it may take some dedication and some work.
Yes, because like anything, it doesn't just come. You have to you have to work to open yourself back up.
Well, it's like it's flexing that muscle. It's exercising that muscle.
Yeah.
Right. Which, you know, I was talking to a medium yesterday, a friend of mine, and she was really emphasizing that this idea that it's a lifestyle, and that if you're treating it like a lot of people treat meditation, right, where it's like, I'm going to sit on my cushion for 15 minutes in the morning, and okay, now I'm done, and
I'm going to go road rage. Yeah,
I'm going to go road rage, right? It's like you're not taking the lessons from the meditation and applying it to your life, and so it's not going to have the same effect. And so she was talking about that a lot of the students that she works with have that dilemma where they want to learn this stuff, but it's kind of like isolated. It's like, oh, now it's time to practice my psi abilities. And then, oh, now I'm going to put it away and go do my regular life.
Right.
And so she was emphasizing that it's like, to get really good at this, it's like, it has to be a lifestyle. It has to be, it's just a part of who you are and what you do all the time. And I thought that, you know, when she said that, I was like, it hit me, because I'm like, oh, well, that explains why I don't progress above a certain level, right? Because it's like, you know, I put it away and then I go to work and I be a scientist, right? And then and so, you know, it's like, it's interesting, like thinking about that and what that means, right? Because it does mean some dedication.
Right. Yeah. Very cool.
Agreed. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Again, I'm going to mention that. What are the dates in April? I think it's the end of April.
I think it's the middle.
Like,
I looked it up.
It's like mid-April, I think.
Like
It's
11, 12, 13, something like that.
So in April on Cape Cod, which is beautiful, and April can be very beautiful out there and not busy.
Not so beautiful right now. Maria is attesting to that, but
right. You may just meet me in person out there. I'm going to look at my.
That'd be great.
And see if I can swing it, because I'm fascinated by this. So
yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, it's 12, 13, 14.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry that we lost Maria to the storm.
I know.
That's that's what happens in February on the Cape.
Yeah.
Big wind.
But at least we got her talking a little bit.
Yes, I know.
You know, yeah, so it was kind of a little.
Yeah.
Well, she knew.
She was happy to hand the show.
She knew.
Yes, exactly. Sure. Oh, well, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Amazing.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And for everyone who's listening, obviously you found us, so you know, but tell your friends. That's psychicwives.com. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Our YouTube channel is The Psychic Wives, where you can see the video of this. And until next time,
be well
and be kind. Bye.
Bye.